got something that might interest you.
In April of 2022, Resident Evil 4 received its first batch of totally new official content in 17 years. That's pretty wild, right? Other than new control methods, the game has remained almost completely identical since 2005, and why shouldn't it have? No need to improve on perfection. But then, in April of 2022, new stuff. There are 20 fully new challenges to the game, with everything from dual wielding to new lighting to spear guns. There's a new big head mode, double speed, golden guns. It's a free update too. All you have to do, the only thing required to get this sizable package of new stuff, is to buy a Meta Quest 2. Resident Evil 4 released exclusively for the headset formerly known as Oculus Quest 2 last year, and just a little while ago dropped a free patch that includes both the original popular Mercenaries score attack mode and the whole slate of new challenges I mentioned. It is genuinely, shockingly good. And yet whenever I write about it, I feel like I have to put this little asterisk after every sentence. No, it's really great. I would recommend this to almost everyone. So just know, we're getting to that asterisk eventually. It lives at the bottom of the page. But first, I've talked about Resident Evil 4 a lot on this channel. I've likened hitting headshots in RE4 to skee-ball. I've talked about the incredible mod retexturing the entire thing. I've explained how I convinced my parents that I should be able to play this game as a 13-year-old because I had just had my bar mitzvah, and so according to the Torah, I was a man. And I've maintained through all that Resident Evil 4 is a more or less perfectly designed game. Sure, there are elements that seem a little old-fashioned now, but within the game, everything works together exactly as it should. For instance, something that might seem archaic to a modern gamer is that RE4 is an action-heavy third-person shooter where you cannot move and shoot at the same time. In order to raise your gun, you have to plant your feet and pick a direction to look in. There's no option to shoot from the hip, or strafe while firing, or do any of the things you might expect of a modern shooter. And it's true that if Uncharted or Gears of War was patched tomorrow to remove moving while shooting, that would feel like a huge step back. But in RE4, the entire game has been designed around this style of action. It's reflected in the enemy's AI and positioning, the architecture of its levels, the way the action values precise shots more than a high number of them. When I've replayed RE4 in the past, I never wished that I could run around like Nathan Drake. In fact, I assumed such a big change would upend the whole delicately balanced construction. And then, in the very first chapter of Resident Evil 4 VR, I realized the entire shape of the game's universe had changed, and I also realized that somehow I didn't mind. A quick note about this video, capturing watchable footage of VR is challenging. Aspect ratios get weird, things get a little motion sicky. Moreover, the bottom of my field of view is cut off in the recording, so the video almost looks like classic Doom sometimes, and it records the perspective of my right eye specifically, which you'll understand the importance of later. I'm doing my best, but it's still a little wonky, and for that, I apologize. When talking about the VR version, it'd be easy to assume there's been one fundamental shift to the game. That is, it's now running on a virtual reality headset. But that'd be underselling this port, because there have actually been multiple fundamental shifts. It's in virtual reality, and it's in first person, and you're far more mobile, and I'll get to it. Third-person games do exist in VR. It wouldn't have been impossible to do this port while keeping the perspective. Watch Leon and Ashley run through diorama-esque levels like Moss or Edge of Nowhere. The developers could have even made a hybrid, a mix of third-person movement and static first-person shooting like, I can't believe I'm referencing this, Metroid Other M. But by committing to both of these changes, locking the player into VR and into this first-person perspective, the game has managed to change form while completely maintaining its identity. I know, this is all very nebulous, so let me give you an example. The first big fight, the village in Resident Evil 4, is designed to make you panic. Previously, you've only fought a couple enemies at a time, now the game throws a dozen at you. Previously, encounters have basically happened in a straight line. Now there are several different entries and exits to any location, meaning you're more likely to get unexpectedly swarmed. I clearly remember my first time playing through this level. Running from a horde of Ganados, I turned around, ready to make a stand, only to be met immediately by a chainsaw-wielding dude who separated my head from my shoulders. And in the years since, I've played that opening countless more times, and now I don't find myself getting panicked in the same way. I know how to manipulate the enemies, where all the good items are, etc. I can't remember the last time I died in that opening fight. Now, enter VR. On paper, this should be far easier. I can run and shoot at the same time. Lining up a shot is quicker and more natural too. The motion controls are far more precise. But what all that fails to take into consideration is the jump to first person and the jump to VR hugely increases the role of my own human fallibility. Entering the town, I was, again, nervous. It feels bigger. The enemies feel closer. Instead of pushing a button to open a door, I actually had to fumble for the doorknob. And although I knew just where to find the shotgun, my hands weren't used to all the parts of it, pulling the trigger with one hand, pumping with another, and when I needed to reload, I realized that I wasn't sure how. The shells were in my hand. I had just found the chamber to slot them into when I looked up, found myself face to face with a man with a chainsaw, and then had my head separated from my shoulders. I felt like I was playing the game for the first time again. I have never been so thrilled to be decapitated. Yes, the game has technically given you far more power, with the potential of increased maneuverability and dexterity, but the counterweight to all that is it's now asking me to do it, not infallibly cool guy Leon Kennedy. Leon doesn't have to think when he reloads a shotgun. I do. Leon doesn't get wigged out when a thrown axe hits him in the noggin. I do. And the coolest part of this is there are a whole host of little quirks I have, quirks that have never really mattered in a game before, that suddenly became part of how I played. It may or may not surprise you to learn that I, Mr. Big Feelings Leftist Essay Guy, have shot a decent number of guns in my time. I was a Boy Scout, I have family in rural areas, me and my dad have a BB gun we take on vacations. That one doesn't count, but it's just funny. And I discovered fairly early on that I'm right-handed, but left-eyed. That is the eye that you aim with while shooting. So, for as long as I've shot long guns, I've done it left-handed. But with pistols, I'm still a righty, because, I don't know, because I'm a mess, basically. That matters, because in this version of RE4, the guns, instead of being only selectable within a menu, are kept on your in-game body. And since I'm right-handed, my pistol is kept on my right hip and my long gun is over my right shoulder. But because of my mixed-up eye-hand dominance, I really need to shoot the long guns left-handed, meaning that I have to reach over my right shoulder with my left hand to grab it, or alternatively, grab it with my right and then toss it to my left. And you might hear this and think that sounds annoying, and I guess it is to some extent. But it's a kind of annoying that makes the character in the game feel like me, like we're working through the same issues, and this quirk leads to some incredibly organic feeling gameplay situations. Games are artificial spaces, and so we describe the things you do in them very artificially. Almost any action taken in the game can be summed up as a game mechanic, but the best VR games, because of their immersion and the possibility space of their motion controls, don't really feel like they have mechanics. They just have the things you do. For example, if I learned that Resident Evil 4 was adding a dual-wielding mechanic, I would think, that's stupid. That encourages a different kind of playstyle than what the game was designed for. Its implementation would feel forced. But when I was slowly stalking through the bug-filled sewer of RE4 VR, knocked a bug off its feet with a shotgun, and then grabbed my pistol in my right hand while still holding the shotgun with my left, firing a few shots to finish it off, that didn't feel like a mechanic. That didn't feel like the game was encouraging me to dual wield. It just felt like I had two hands, and it allowed me to use both of them. As I talked about with Half-Life Alyx, simply having hands brings a level of spontaneity and presence to the world unparalleled in flat-screen games. There was a moment late in RE4 when I realized I could actually angle my gun down in a way completely impossible with traditional controls, fire downwards at enemies climbing up a ladder. And there's not a prompt or tutorial for this, it's just what the situation seemed to ask for. The shift to this first-person tactility also had me making different choices than the countless other times I've played through the game. The popular choice for the best pistol in RE4 is the Red 9, an incredibly powerful Mauser that you can attach a stock to for increased stability. However, in this playthrough, I opted to turn the laser sights off, preferring to use all the gun's actual iron sights, and because of that, the Red 9 fell a bit short. Its antique sight was too small and too dark to use in the shadowy hallways of the game. Instead, I picked up the Blacktail, a modern handgun with crystal clear sights and a satisfying slide, and breezed through the game with it. Conversely, although the Striker shotgun has the best stats and semi-auto firing, I found I was just too fond of my pump action to get rid of it. I made decisions based on feeling instead of raw data. It's remarkable how well the game works, almost completely unaltered except for the parallel jumps to VR and first person. Treasures are still hidden in the environment, and now you can shoot them down with one hand and catch them in the other. Snakes still hide in boxes and scare the bejesus out of you. The dogs are still far too fast, and the Regenerators are still the most disturbing enemy put on this earth. I cannot express how skin-crawling it is to shoot one of their legs out and have them suddenly fall towards you, so close it feels like you could touch them. And the level design still shines, the varying heights and paths through an environment a perfect match for the heightened depth perception VR provides. Protecting Ashley feels more urgent now, as you're literally glancing over your shoulder to make sure she's close behind you. Little touches like how the cultists are significantly taller than the Ganados stand out far more. I mean, hell, even the shooting gallery, a side activity I never found any value in, suddenly became an incredibly fun place to test out guns. I got every single bottle cap. It's absurd. Nowhere does this feel more true than in the Mercenaries mode, which wasn't included at launch, but was added fairly recently through a free update. The Mercenaries is a mode that's been in every version of Resident Evil 4 since release, and for almost as long, has been my favorite part of the game. It's an arcade mode, a score attack, where survival is secondary to racking up as many points as you can. Enemies spawn infinitely, and maintaining your ammo cache and health now share mental space with building an ever-increasing combo string by, shooting and kicking guys. Perhaps the biggest problem with RE4 VR is that eventually the panic of the new perspective wears off, and the game is just much easier than it's ever been. Reloading is faster, lining up headshots is faster, you can dual wield and move at the same time. But the Mercenaries doesn't suffer from the same problem, because you're only competing against yourself. The score can always be higher. It feels, after the rigidly designed levels of the campaign, like you're finally being set free, turned loose on a scenario with incredible new abilities. This is only accentuated with the characters exclusive to the mode, like Krauser with his absurdly powerful bow, or Wesker, who can punch dudes into another dimension. I could play the Mercenaries forever. I've been playing it for like half my life already. What I didn't expect in the new Mercs update to the VR version is the challenges, which are, as I said at the top, the first new content for this game in 17 years. There are 20 new variants of the Mercenaries, most with extremely specific requirements and loadouts. These range from easy and goofy, like an unlimited rocket launcher, to extremely tense. An untouchable challenge where one hit meant death had me screaming. They're also tuned to the new abilities of the VR version. Many of these rely on your heightened agility and aiming, and would be near impossible in the original game. I experienced even higher intensity moments here than in the campaign. More than once I emptied my long gun and desperately pulled out my pistol, only to hear the click of an empty clip. It's far easier to forget to reload when the game feels like it's happening all around you. But I think the best part of these new additions is just showing off more of these wonderfully specific VR mechanics. One of the best new challenges hands you a pair of immensely powerful revolvers, something that seems completely overpowered, until you're scrambling through the reload motions of each while a chainsaw breathes down your neck. There's so much care and nuance in how each weapon works, but given the focus on conservation in the campaign, I probably never would have noticed the intricacies of the Magnum or the mine launcher. This new content offers the opportunity to go buck wild with RE4 VR, jump into a playground designed to show all the new tricks this old dog can do. Of course, there are exceptions. This is an incredibly faithful recreation of Resident Evil 4, and although there are plenty of parts that still shine, there are other aspects that I wish could have been tweaked a little more. Most obvious while watching gameplay is how the camera cuts to a third-person view for the kicks and suplexes that are part of general combat. This actually isn't as jarring as it looks, and keeping the player in Leon's head while he spins around would have been incredibly nauseating, but it's a solution that would never be in a game built ground up for VR. More irritating are the cutscenes themselves, which play on a kind of movie screen in front of you. Again, this isn't the worst way of staying faithful to the source material, but I kept thinking how cool it would be to stay in first person while Luis was impaled, or the virus ran through our veins, or Chief Mendez shed his human form. The sense of presence in the world is totally lost when we're taken to the Resident Evil home theater experience. This is most evident when shorter cutscenes interrupt what should be thrilling action scenes. For example, the fight against it in the hanging containers was one of my most anticipated parts of the game. The grotesque creature, close quarters, and frantic pathfinding should have been a home run for the new perspective. And it's true, shooting out the locks was incredibly tense, and smashing the buttons, now physically rendered, was very satisfying. But again and again, the game cuts away, showing that the door is now halfway unlocked, or fully unlocked, or the containers are falling away. When the game was in third person and on a flat screen, these kinds of cutaways weren't a big deal. But being ripped out of Leon's head in a life or death scenario to see a button change colors sucks, and it ruins the pacing of what could have otherwise been a standout sequence. There are other nitpicks. You can't adjust the level of auto-aim. If you have boobs and or big ol' pecs, it's possible that the knife and grenade strapped to your vest may be placed inside your chest. As of writing this, it's still missing the Assignment Ada and Separate Ways submissions, which have been in all previous versions of the game for 4 hardware generations now. But my biggest nitpick is the platform it comes on. My excitement at the announcement trailer for this game turned almost immediately to disappointment after learning that my Oculus Rift CV1, or the consumer version 1, that I've used for the past 3 years wasn't going to be able to play Resident Evil 4. This was the VR system I played Beat Saber, Half-Life Alyx, and Pistol Whip on. However, despite the fact that the remake of RE4 was funded by Oculus, it cannot be played on an Oculus Rift. It is exclusive to the Quest 2. Now, having purchased a second-hand Quest 2, I can report that it's a genuinely impressive piece of technology. It's self-contained, meaning you don't need a big computer to make it run. It's fully wireless and manages to keep track of your hands without any external sensors. It has this kind of headphone-less 3D audio that feels like a magic trick. I like all these things, but none of them make it uniquely capable of playing this game. Almost every VR rig available today could play this game, the thing that makes the Quest 2 uniquely capable of playing Resident Evil 4 VR. Is a business decision made by a suit. And yeah, I've played video games for a long time. I know that exclusivity deals are in some ways a fact of life. But I think the reason I hate this one so particularly much is I feel like as soon as I saw this trailer, the whole potential future of VR narrowed in front of me. I mean, the Oculus Quest 2 isn't even called that anymore. It's called the Meta Quest, which, yeah, you can kind of guess the rest of it. The company formerly known as Facebook has promised several things about the future of VR. They've promised that it's the next evolution of social connection, that you'll enjoy working where you play and playing where you work. They promise that one day we'll all enjoy working in PlayStation home-ass virtual rooms where our store-brand Miis can high-five over projections of natural disasters. They also promised, when they bought Oculus, that you'd never need a Facebook account to use VR at all, nor would they sell the unbelievable amount of data the system collects on you, data which includes your physical characteristics, what your room looks like, and your literal eye movement patterns. They reversed course on all of these things. Turns out these companies can just lie, with no consequence, anytime they want. But more than just that, I worry that the future of VR in general is going to be squished through a small, meta-shaped tube. Because new technology like this does unfortunately seem like it needs investment from a company with basically infinite capital to gain widespread adoption, it needs to be able to sell hardware at a loss, sustain developers while the industry is still in its infancy. Meta could do all that. But the restricting of new games to the Quest is an indication that they intend to do more. To not just grow the VR ecosystem, but close it off, tie every bit of new development to the metaverse controlled by guess who? I do think VR offers experiences with art completely impossible elsewhere. I spent most of this video talking about just how revolutionary even an old game can feel when given the time and consideration it deserves. And I know that in the economy we've built for ourselves, it's unlikely that a game like this would have received funding to get made at all, if not for all this extra bullshit. It's just... You know, there's actually a version of the Quest officially for sale that doesn't have to connect to Meta. Its ad copy says it's designed for businesses. It costs $500 more than the standard one, which means it's worth at least $500 to Facebook to have you plugged into its feedback loop. I don't know, man. I don't like being a complains about game corporations guy in my videos. I'm already that guy too much in my real life, and YouTube has plenty of these. I started writing this video because of how exciting I find RE4 VR, and I absolutely still do, but every time I tried to write this essay, I found I couldn't do it honestly without segueing into how much I hate everything that surrounds the game. And now that I have segued into that, I don't know how to finish the essay at all. You know, the story of Resident Evil 4 is largely just a goofy romp, but I've always loved the end credits. After jet skiing out of an exploding island, you're treated to this surprisingly poignant credits roll, where a grainy projection shows a series of illustrations of the people who lived in the village before they were infected with the parasite that turns them into mindless bad guys. And it's sweet, and sad, and purposeful without being too obvious. They were normal and happy, and then a powerful evil cult showed up with literal parasites infecting the community against their will and turning each villager into an unwilling weapon. The Ganados were a largely one-note enemy mob that, in the last few moments of the game, are given just a touch more dimensionality, a little pathos for you to think about on the next playthrough. Those illustrations aren't there in the VR version. Instead, the names and titles of people who poured their talents into this game scroll over generic backgrounds. Immediately before this, the jet ski escape from the island plays out exactly as you would hope in VR, an absolute rush of first-person action, more thrilling than the sequence ever has been. And then those credits roll. Just a list stripped of its personality. And the game finishes, and I take off the headset, and I feel a little flatter than I did a minute before. VR isn't the only thing happening in the world of Resident Evil 4. 2 years ago, I talked about the biggest mod in the history of the series, a glorious restoration of every texture by a tiny team of volunteers. When I released that essay, they had been working on the mod for 6 years with no end in sight. But as of February of this year, it's actually done. Mostly. This video was sponsored by Nebula and CuriosityStream, and I've made a whole second video exclusive to Nebula revisiting this labor of love now that it's finished. Half the enjoyment of playing this thing is feeling the knowledge that the mod's creators have of the game. It's like having a museum guide point out the things that you should really pay attention to. I found this, of all places, in the configuration settings for the HD project. You can watch this essay along with the hours of other Nebula exclusive content I've got by, you know this part, following the link in the description. There you'll find a near absurd deal, $15 for an entire year of Nebula and CuriosityStream. I love making these sorts of videos for Nebula. They wouldn't really fit on my YouTube channel, but they're things I care about, and Nebula's creator-first policies make it much more accommodating for these topics. But even if you don't care about that, you should still get this deal, because CuriosityStream has this ridiculous video about people wearing VR headsets on a roller coaster, and thousands of other documentaries and non-fiction titles. Listen, you watched this whole video. You clearly enjoy hearing me talk about Resident Evil 4 at least a little bit. I'm offering you more of that for an extremely low price. And all you gotta do is follow that link.
¡Con alegría!